Hey everybody, Matt Johnston here, and I'm back with some more hopefully instructive information. Today's video, we're going to be talking about sexual harassment. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody, please hit that subscribe button that you see down there, and if you want a notification when we put out new content, click the little bell as well. And for those of you who are interested, please feel free to leave a review or a comment or things like that down below. I really would appreciate it. So, I am recording this video a couple of days after the New York State Attorney General's office issued a report dealing with Governor Andrew Cuomo's sexual harassment of a number of employees, state employees, as well as members of the public. I don't really care about the details of what he said or what he did. It seems pretty egregious. Well, it is pretty egregious. Doesn't seem it. It is pretty egregious. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about here is an issue of culture. Sexual harassment happens. It's going to continue to happen as much as we try to prevent it, as much as we try to educate people on it. It's going to happen. And it should be no shock to anybody that it happens. But this is one of the situations in which leadership and management sets a culture that doesn't allow it to fester, that doesn't provide fertile ground for the kind of conduct and behavior that is shockingly described in the New York AGs report. So, what do I mean by culture? Well, in the report, basically from the executive summary, it was clear that there was an environment in which the governor's toxicity allowed things to happen that should not have happened. Now, I recognize that we are talking about the governor of a major state of the United States. We're talking about a guy who is well known for vindictive behavior. But the problem is not just the culture at the top. Certainly, the culture that the governor exhibited is one that is at best described as toxic and probably better described as utterly abusive, not just to the females that he harassed, but to the rest of the staff. As one of the harassed individuals said, she knew, as did many other troopers, state troopers who were part of his security detail, knew of horror stories about people getting kicked off the detail or transferred over little things that upset the governor. Everyone knew he was very vindictive. Now, if you are a business leader, being a vindictive business leader is generally not a good idea. You're going to have a hard time finding staff. You're going to have a hard time maintaining staff. You're also going to have a hard time maintaining your business. One of the issues with governance is we have to have governors, and we have to have people that work for the governor to execute his job, his title, in order to do the things that are necessary for the governance of a state. So it's not like the governor's office can be shut down simply because the leader of the governor's office, that is the governor, is, well, a jerk, putting it mildly. So the atmosphere was pretty toxic. But I really want to talk about the actions of the people around the governor who sort of enabled this behavior, or at least, if not enabled it, at least took measures to avoid confronting the issue. There was one particular incident described in the executive summary, and I'm going to quote here from the report. Among other things, senior staff within the executive chamber, along with a group of outside advisors, engaged in a series of retaliatory actions, including 1. Disseminating to the press previously confidential and privileged files that related to complaints that had been made against an employee prior to her departure from the executive chamber, and 2. Preparing a proposed op-ed originally drafted by the governor that contained personal and professional attacks on the employee, and then sharing the written drafts with a number of current and former executive chamber employees. In essence, the senior leadership at the senior leadership within the governor's office undertook actions that were retaliatory in nature and enabled the kind of behavior that the governor was engaging in. The senior executives at this, in the governor's office made sure to publicly denounce and ignore the allegations that were made by an employee, and in doing so engaged in retaliation, which is again a violation of both federal and New York state law. The other aspects of these things that were concerning of me is that senior executives, the governor's chief of staff at the time, the special counsel to the governor, found complaints by the employees credible, but did not conduct any significant investigation. And indeed, they made a informal change in the behavior to isolate young women from the governor and do this in an informal way without discussing anything. There is what is referred to as the governor's office for employee relations. Think of it as HR for the governor's office. There was no real report that was ever done, no investigation that was ever done. If you are a small business and you have leadership or you are middle management responding to leadership who is setting this kind of a tone, there is an important function that needs to be understood. If you are management and you know about a complaint and you do not investigate the complaint and you do not follow up, even if you have to go outside the company to do so, to outside counsel, you can potentially be held personally liable for damages. If an employee reports a harassing situation, even if it's against the office, I don't know, for lack of a better term, the office asshole who has everybody scared, even if that person is the owner of the business, you have an obligation, both a legal and I would argue a moral/ethical obligation to investigate. So my issue with what has happened here is a function of the culture within the governor's office. And senior leadership sets the culture. They determine the tone. The executives that worked for the governor, his aides, his senior aides, who, if not condoned, at least did not condemn the actions or took retaliatory actions, this is the kind of culture that is going to breed the kind of harassment. If you build a culture within your company that does not tolerate harassment, does not tolerate discrimination, you're not going to prevent the one guy or the one woman or some employee who is going to act negatively, act wrongly, act in a way that should be disciplined, including termination. You're not going to be able to prevent an individual action, but you want to create a culture that says this is not tolerated, where anybody and everybody who hears or sees or witnesses these kinds of actions takes the necessary action to report, to investigate, and to shut down such behavior. It can be as simple as pulling somebody aside and say, hey, that last joke you told, that's not cool, man. We don't do that here. We don't talk about those things here. We don't touch other employees. We do not engage in innuendo. We do not engage in sexual discrimination or sexual harassment. If you want to do that, there's the door. We don't want you working here. It can be that simple. You offer an atmosphere and a culture that does not tolerate it. And you make sure that whoever is the victim, whoever is subject to these kinds of behaviors, knows that they can report it, they won't be retaliated against, and they will be supported by their coworkers. So while sexual harassment happens, you want to create a culture that does not tolerate it. In fact, you want to create a culture that is the exact opposite of everything described in the New York Attorney General's report. In the meantime, we have some other resources that are going to be available on our website, on our blog. So you can go over to mattthelawyer.com, look up sexual harassment. You'll see all kinds of resources and articles that we have there. You can also check out some of the information that's available from the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They have lots of trainings available. Some of them you have to pay for, some of them are free. And we encourage you to look up also state and local resources regarding harassment and discrimination. In the meantime, I hope you will subscribe to the channel. You can hit the little button right up here. If you want to see some other content that we put together, it's that button right up there. And in the meantime, go out and watch some live soccer. Talk to y'all later.